his shirt. So welcome, Rob.
Hello. Have we got the clicky thing? Where's right there? Oh, I found it. Yay! I can succeed in life. Good morning or good afternoon. Nearly. Yes, so today I'm going to do a talk on using instructional and informative sounds and how they can enhance your game design and subsequently your game. So today we're going to have a look at several topics. There's a lot. It looks like there's a lot to go through, but quite a few of these are actually going to be caught in 2 or 3 different unique subjects. So I'm going to give you introductions. There's going to be what I'm actually going to be talking about. What is each of those sounds? How are they related? I'm going to introduce you to concepts called diegetic and non-diegetic, which I will explain further what that is. I'm going to tell you why you should care as a player and why you should care as a designer. We're going to give you some problems and solutions and some conclusions and a few other little bits and bobs in between. So, a little bit about myself. I am the senior sound designer at Redhill Games. For those that don't know, we released last year 9 to 5, free-to-play game. Previously to that, my industry experiences, I started off in the industry at Rockstar Games. I spent 9 years working on like GTA, Red Dead Redemption, LA Noire, things like that. I progressed from there to work at Pinewood Studios, doing movies and sort of other games, VR sort of titles. I then moved to the Czech Republic. I moved to Brno, working for Wargaming, where we was predominantly a prototype studio. From there, I then moved to Helsinki 3 years ago this week, would you believe? Yeah, time flies. And I've been working there ever since. I've done a few sort of these lectures over the last couple of years. This is the first time in a long time that I've been able to do it in front of actual people. So, oh my God, thank you all so much for coming along. It does make it a lot easier, and talking in an empty room is never fun. So, instructional versus informative. I've got, as you can see, lots of examples here. So we're going to sort of mix through the two. Now, we hear instructional and informative sounds on a day-to-day basis, but we probably don't realize it. This can be from sat-navs to parking sensors to alarm clocks and things like that. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of some sounds that I want you to have a listen to, and feel free to sort of interject at any particular point. I want you to tell me if you think it's instructional or informative. Instructional is it tells you to do something. Informative is it just tells you, oh, something's happening, something's going on, which seems fairly obvious, you'd think. What's this? No, shout out, it's fine. Yeah, but it might also be that your eggs have finished boiling. Yeah. Yeah, it was an alarm clock, and an alarm clock could be set for many, many different reasons. It could be instructions for you to get your ass out of bed. It could also be informing you that you have 5 minutes left of your talk, and you need to wrap it up. What's this? Other than annoying. It's informative because it tells you someone's near your vehicle. Maybe, yeah. What's that? If you work in a shop, what does that mean to you? Someone coming in. So is that instructional or informative? It's informative because it doesn't tell you to do anything. What's this? It's a problem if you work in a hospital, is what that is. Now that's a good example of it starts off informative and then it gets instructional because it tells you that the patient's fine and then it tells you, patient isn't fine, you should probably do something about that. I've edited that down significantly for brevity, but yeah, microwaves tells you that your food is ready. Anybody who drives a car will probably recognize this. Is this instructional or informative? Informative. And what happens when you hear Should you keep reversing? That's usually followed by a bump when you hear that. So again, that's instructional and informative. You know, it's instructional because it's telling you, like, you can keep going, and then it's informative. Oh, actually, no. This is a better example.
After 200 yards, turn right.
Instructional or informative? Instructional.
Turn right.
Yeah, fairly straightforward. What about this one? What is it? And instructional, informative? Yeah. It can be both, because it's instructional, because it tells you to get out of the house before you die. But it's also informative because it also means that your toast's ready. What's this when you like sat at home and you're a bit... What do we think? Is this instructional or is it informative? Now, here's the thing. It can either be instructional or informative. It can be informative to tell you it's time to eat. So this is, you know, this can inform you quite nicely that these guys are coming at just the wrong time. So that can tell you that it's time to eat. That can be informative, but it can also be instructional. For all the very wrong reasons, you know, and we've all been there. We've all like, oh, am I hungry? Am I? Nope. You know, the infamous trot. So, just like in real life, video games and movies use instructional and informative sounds. Now, one thing that you might have noticed over those examples is it's very ambiguous. It could be either. Now, the beautiful thing about that is instructional or informative can both be ignored. The fire alarm goes off. You can ignore it. You probably shouldn't, but you could. Likewise, with the sat-nav, you can ignore it and say, actually, I don't want to turn right. I'm going to turn left. And what happens is nothing. You get lost, maybe, but the sat-nav doesn't care. The sat-nav doesn't know. It's just giving you arbitrary instructions. Now, in video games, very, very similar sort of thing. However, when you're given an instruction to do something in a video game, the game probably won't progress unless you do it, depending on the kind of game that you're working on. So, these sounds in video games, we can kind of link them together with sort of other areas of gameplay. Now, as an audio designer, I'm going to introduce you to two concepts that we have as in sound. Now, most people who work in level design or game design or things like that, they probably don't know about these terms because it's not a term that normal people use. It's a term that audio people use and or film people. Diegetic and non-diegetic. Who's heard of those words before? Yeah. So the difference between the two. So diegetic sound is any sound that originates from the world of a film or a game. A very simple way to think about this is a diegetic sound is something that happens in the world that is implied that everybody that is inside that scene can hear it. So if you are in a video game and you see a car and it drives by, that is a diegetic sound because the character, the player, the person that you are in that game world can see it, it's a physical object in the game world. That's not limited to things that you can see. You can imply things in the game world as well. So like if you're in a film scene and an explosion happens off screen, you know, it's implied if everybody reacts to that, oh, what's that noise? It's implied that that is a diegetic sound. A non-diegetic sound is anything that is typically, well, we would consider it as being like a narration kind of thing. So if you are watching a film and you hear Morgan Freeman doing a voiceover, that is implied that only you, the audience, can hear and not the person in the scene. That would be non-diegetic. Film music is a really good example of this. In video games, we do it all the time with UI sounds. You know, like we don't want the player to know that they're about to they're the player, they don't care. We want you, the person who's the actual player, we want you to know, actually, if you don't go and get this medkit, you're in big trouble. And I'm going to show you some examples. Now, this is the movie Jaws. Now, this is a good example of diegetic and non-diegetic when it plays. Diegetic sounds, you can hear water splashing, you can hear children playing. We know that's diegetic because we can see them doing their things. The music, however, is non-diegetic. That is for you, the audience. And let's be fair, if those people on the beach could hear that music, they'd probably not be in the water at this point. They'd be like... But it's also a good example of instructional and informative, because if you heard that music as a gamer, you'd know that there's something hottailing it behind you. So it's a really good example of how we use diegetic and non-diegetic in a way that makes sense for the viewer from instructions and information. Starts off diegetic, then goes into the music, which is non-diegetic. So, when we put these two together, the brain processes 20 times faster than visual cues. That's just a fact. That's a scientific fact. I could tell you well how I know that, but I've forgotten the references, so I'm sorry. Sound can still be used to telegraph valuable information without any visual prompts at all. So you can still actually give information without actually needing a UI artist, without actually needing anything like that. You can use sound for that, and that's why games have won awards for sound. Narratives can be explicit or implied by using a mixture of the above principles, so you can actually use that to your advantage within the narrative of the game that you're trying to make. So here's a really good example of that. Now this is instructional and informative sounds as non-diegetic. This is a clip from Warzone, and I want you to have a look at the clip, and this is giving you information like the objectives, the team status, kill confirmations, the second-to-second player, and follows mostly the on-screen UI. So it is a bit choppy, but yeah. Oh, it's very choppy. I think it's broken. It should not be doing that. Oh, there we go. There we go. It's proper clip now. There we go. All UI sounds. This is all for the player, not implied for the actual operator that you're playing as to hear these sounds. Other people on the game world, they can't hear these sounds because you're interacting with those objects. So the reloading sound, that's diegetic because that's an actual physical motion in the game world. So yeah, those are instructional, mostly informative sounds. They doesn't tell you to do anything there. You just go around and that's the big thing. So here we have instructional information now as diegetic. Now, this is taken from Modern Warfare 2, and this is in my humble opinion, and I had nothing to do with the development of this, but the first time I played this mission, I thought it was an absolute masterclass of tension. And this basically instructs the player on where to go, how to go, tells them of the time limit, it implies low health, and instructs the player to go full speed to make the final jump. Now, the music in this is non-diegetic, and it really helps, but...
Kilo 6-1, the primary exfil point is compromised. We're en route to the backup helipad using enemy transport. Meet us there, over.
all the information that you need to do the next part of the mission in one sentence in the game world. Go, go, go. You play this for the first time, keep moving or you're dead. Low health part coming up. Notice the filtering. The blood on the screen implies that the player character.
Kilo 6-1, we're taking heavy fire, but we're almost there. Stand by. Stay strong, keep going.
First time any of you have ever played that mission, I guarantee you'll have finished that, put the controller down and just gone, whew. Absolute masterclass. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant part of the game. Definitely recommend you play it if you haven't already. So, what can be instructional and informative? So basically anything that you want can be either of those things. Footsteps can inform the players where other players are. Weapon orientation sounds can show if someone is facing you when they're shooting and if they are a threat. So if someone's facing you and they're firing the gun, if they turn around, that can sound different. You can use that to subconsciously telegraph information to players. Weapon tails can be hooked into elevation of the player so that you can tell if someone is shooting at you in a first-person shooter from a rooftop versus ground zero. That's what we did in 9 to 5. We had a problem where we had to know, is someone shooting at you from a rooftop or are on the same level as you? And we used the tails of the weapons specifically to do that. Near-miss sounds can instruct the player to get into cover. When you hear something whiz by, you're like, oh no, I need to not die. Alarms can instruct the player to evacuate the area. You know, if there's an alarm going off, oh, you've got 10 seconds to get out of here, otherwise all hell breaks loose. For an example, footsteps is a brilliant example because most people know what footsteps sound like. So footsteps can tell a player not only if someone is nearby, but if they are walking, running, or crawling. Likewise, if they are indoors, outdoors, or even if they are above you. Now, this is one of the things that we was trying out with 9 to 5. As such, I'm going to show you a little bit of sort of clips on how we did certain things, why we did them that way, and the implications of that in a game setting. Now, this is me pre-beard and pre-tattoos. I'm recording basically footsteps, and no, they are not my sexy boots. They were a colleague's boots, which she wonderfully loaned us, purely and simply because they are big, heavy boots, and they have lots of buckles on them. This was perfect for us because it gives me three things. It gives me the impact sounds, which we have there. We have the second microphone, which is more for the buckle sounds and the actual sort of detail. And there's another microphone which you can't really see underneath the palette. Now, I've put salt on the palette so that it sounds dirty. And this is all of the mics together at the same time. Sounds a bit weird when you play them all at the same time. Okay, so what does that sound like in the game world? Now, this is pre-beta gameplay. This was from 9 to 5. What you're about to hear is the footsteps, and I want you to kind of, if you can, probably maybe not work so well in here, but I want you to tell me if you think, or like point if you think the player is above you, to the right or the left. You know, if you think you know where the player is, just sort of point in the general direction. keep watching. That's the sound of the footsteps from the microphone underneath the pallet. This usually works much better on a stereo speaker or headphones, to be fair. Now you can hear the actual impact sounds and the detail of the actual sort of foot. You can tell the difference there. Now, in that particular example, we took that recording of the footsteps that you heard, and we used all the recordings that we had so that we could actually identify, oh, that sounds like they're directly above me. So I now know that there is somebody there. In a first-person shooter where that person may be friendly or an enemy, you don't know, that changes the game completely. That's not without its problems, though. So I think key things to note here is this was before we actually had the occlusion system. So like it's not proper gameplay. That's not what we shipped with. There were technical reasons why we couldn't do that in the end. But that was one of the things, one of the many things that we was testing when we was making the game. How do we actually give people instructions without actually giving them instructions on where players are? That's a brilliant example of how we did that. So why should you care as a gamer? Well, you shouldn't. Good sound design should not be obvious. Like if we've done our job well, it just sounds like it normally should. So why should you only care if you're not getting the information? Because you're not going to succeed. If you don't know to turn right at the next junction, if the sat-nav doesn't tell you to turn right at the next junction, video games are no different. So why should you care as a game designer? This is controversial at best. Tutorialization and onboarding for any game is always most effective when the player is getting as much information unconsciously. Nobody likes to do these tutorials where there's like pop-ups on the screen all the time. Go here, do this, go here, do this, go here, go there, go here, do this. How many times have you had an online mobile game and you've just gone, right, I'll give this a go. Uninstall. We've all done it. We've all, yeah, I'll give that a go. And, yeah. Likewise, the opposite. How many times have you played a game and there's no onboarding, no tutorialization, and you find yourself in a situation where you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. It makes no sense. And that's a problem. Portal is a brilliant example of onboarding and tutorialization done with virtually no instructions to the player at all. It is a masterclass of tutorialization and onboarding, just that opening sequence. The immersion of the player is paramount, and diegetic and non-diegetic sounds can be used for narrative purposes as well as instructional and informative. Again, Portal, excellent example of this. Single player and multiplayer games are different beasts and thus need different solutions for audio telegraphing. Anybody that's worked on single player games will know the difference if they've ever had to work on multiplayer aspects of games. When we were working on GTA 5 or Red Dead Redemption 2, things like that, the single player campaigns, we could go nuts. We could do anything that we wanted to sound-wise. But for the GTA Online, whoa, hang on a minute. We can't do that for these technical reasons. Likewise with 9 to 5, there were loads of things that I was like, oh man, it'd be so cool if we could do this. And then our technical director would just laugh and go, no. Which he's perfectly right to do so, because with the telegraphing with the footsteps example that I gave you, it's not just left and right, clip, clop, one sound. When each single footstep of each character has 3 different voices to it, the impact sound, the boot Foley sound, and the sound underneath that physical material, and then you consider that there are at least 120 something physical materials in the game that the player can walk on, and there are 9 players on the map, that soon gets to a silly amount of numbers of voices. And then you have to think about guns and ambience and UI. It gets real expensive real quick. So what can I do as a game designer? So basically, this is your opportunity if you're in game design or you are starting game design or you work with game designers and you're interested in audio. These are the things that you should be looking out for. Instructional informative sounds can come in all sorts of different places, from impact sounds to objective statements through to the player orientation and threat levels. Your world is your oyster. The only concern that you are likely to have as a game designer is the technical implications when they say, yeah, we could do that, but, which is always something that you'll get from the technical team. Think about how sounds can be used to instruct, inform, immerse, and benefit the player. Like, this one's more for the audio designers than game designers, but I've linked the two together here. Think about who should hear these sounds. Can telegraphing of their information be done as part of the narrative, or does it have to be non-diegetic? A good example of this is, does that sound have to be heard in the game world, and is that an instruction, or is it information? And who should hear that sound? Multiplayer games, you have this thing where actually you have Team A versus Team B. Should Team A know what Team B are doing? Can we do that as part of the narrative, or do we have to telegraph that to different players? Because that's different how you set it up in your game engine. It's different how you telegraph that information. How does telegraphing information change your game design? You know, like, should the telegraphing of information change the game design? Controversial question. I have no answers for that. Can sound enhance, improve, or streamline your game design in a positive way? So don't just say, I want the game to work this way. Think, actually, if I change one thing, will that have a positive effect on 10 other things or a negative effect on 10 other things? And how dependent are you for visual cues versus audio cues? When we first started looking at 9 to 5, we're like, right, okay, we want to give as much information so people know what to do. And very quickly, it was like, that's a lot of information on the screen popping up. Right, we need to get rid of some of that. How do we do that? And that was where real game design comes in, because then you're actually no longer thinking, what about the player? We're now thinking about, well, how does that influence people? What are we going with here? So, potential problems and potential solutions. So, some problems. Sonic fatigue. We've all played video games or watched a film and we've just gone, oh my God, I've got such a headache after playing that. Like, especially if it's an intense round or something. Like, if you're playing, like, Overwatch is a really good example of that. If you're playing Overwatch and you have headphones on and it's a 10-minute sort of battle, by the time you finish that battle, you put the headphones on the ground and you're like, oh, I need a minute. Like, it's horrible. TMI, too much information. Is there such a thing as too much information? Absolutely. And where is the problem coming from? Is that too much information on screen? Is it too much information sonically? Where are the problems? Loss of importance. You can't see for the wood for the trees. Once you're bombarded by information or instructions, it's hard to understand where the actual problems are. You know, like, well, what is the most important thing that I should be doing at this particular point? Should I be doing the objective to move forward, or should I be getting in cover because I'm dying? So you end up being lost in the woods. Breaking of immersion and technical limitations. Breaking of immersion is a big nitty no-no for anyone in the games industry. We want the player to be invested in the game that they are playing. Anything that pulls the player out of that for good reason, we should probably try and avoid. Now, if you're in a situation where you have to pull the player out of the immersion, you better hope that that reason is a really good reason. Otherwise, people will hammer you for it, not just in reviews, but like if it happens too often, people will uninstall your game and they won't play it. Technical limitations. Again, this is likewise back to the voices thing. You know, like we was testing out for 9 to 5 orientation of weapons. If the player was facing you or turning away, if they were above you, below you, that meant that every single gunshot had basically 35 voices. A voice would be a single sound. Now, most games have a limit of 156 voices in any one particular time. So every time you fire a gun, it's 35 sounds. 35 sounds. You machine gun, you've hit that limit within 3 seconds. And then you times that by 9 because there's 9 players on the map. And then you times each player with not just the gun sounds, but also each footstep, which, as we already know, each footstep has at least 4 or 5 different voices attached to it. The Foley sound, again, another 3 or 4 voices. The game ambience, 8 or 9 voices. Next thing you know, 3 seconds of gameplay with 9 players, you've got 587 different voices. You're only allowed 156. Something breaks. Technical director goes mad. Solutions. Conductor systems. Handle the priority of sounds. What is the most important thing? What can we afford to get rid of? If we're in a one-on-one battle between me and Milosh and we're shooting each other, do we care if there's a bird singing? No, we don't. Kill the bird. Not literally, but... Voice management systems, like what can we do to manage the expectations of how many voices we're using? Again, can we do something with that on a technical basis? Is that a code solution or is that an audio solution? You know, who fixes these problems? In that particular case, I would probably argue that the voice management system is a code thing. What can we do to limit the voices that we're using? Dynamic mixing. What is the most important thing that we want to focus on? If it's not important, we just bring the volume down. Because it's still information, it's still informative. We still want people to know about this thing, but it's just not important at that second. Conclusion. We need to normalize using terms like diegetic and non-diegetic so that the sound designers know the intention of who should be hearing the sound, because that can change an entire game and how you perceive it as a player. One of the things that we found with the footsteps was the perception that we had watching the game was different to those that was playing the game. So the footsteps, for an example, the distance attenuation, we would sit down and we would mix it, and like we would have myself, there would be Milosh and JJ and a few other guys that were like, that's the perfect distance, that sounds good, that feels good, it looks fantastic. And then they play the game and go, what the hell? I can hear I can hear footsteps like only when they're like right in front of me. I can't hear, you know, and the idea was the perception when you were playing the game was very, very different when you was watching the game. When you're watching the game as a narrative, as a movie, it's like, yeah, that feels good, that looks good. When you're in the second and you're in a firefight, I'm like, God, I didn't know he was there until he was like right behind me. So that's where we have to compromise. Thinking outside the box in relation to what is possible to do. Orientation, elevation, really good example here. What can we do to subconsciously change how the player plays the game without even going to the code department, without even touching the game design side of it? Like, how can we make it better for the player? How can we immerse them? Can telegraphing be done without scripting? Can the audio designer add something to assist there? Anything that doesn't involve code support or a designer having to take time out of their day to do your little thing is a good idea as a designer. It's a really good idea as an audio person because it puts you in a situation where you actually have a lot more control. However, these are not decisions that you should just willy-nilly put in. They are things that you should do as an example, get a video of locally on your machine, and then pull some of your executive producers and those that are actually in charge and say, I did a cool thing. Have a look, tell me what you think. Does it add anything? If it doesn't add it, get rid of it. Invest in a conductor system and priority system. That's a big one. Like from the very start of your project, go to your technical people and say, we are going to need this system because if we don't have it, we're going to have a problem in about a year's time when we don't have the bandwidth or the manpower to actually devote just to the audio. Don't think minimum amount of work, think big picture. So don't just go, I just need footsteps for the player. Okay, what kind of footsteps? Running, walking, crawling, what are the distance of those? Does that impact something like a stealth system? See what can be done in relation to other elements of gameplay. Can you get something for free just by rethinking the design of something? Ambience is a really good example of this. In 9 to 5, we did an experiment with birds and stuff like that, where we had ambient zones where the player goes in and it just randomly plays bird song sort of thing. But then it's like, what happens if the player fires the gun? Should the birds fly away? We did a couple of examples. It worked brilliantly. Unfortunately, the implications were everyone on the map, if you heard a gunshot somewhere and birds flying away, that was brilliant. Well, you know that there's someone there. But then it's like, well, what happens in the second round? Do the birds come back? Do we actually need actual birds? Should they be animated? And then you've gone from, oh, I did this cool thing to, shit, now I need an animator. I need someone to like mold and, you know, model the birds. And it escalates. And it's like, well, now we have to put them on rooftops, because it makes sense that there would be birds on rooftop. Oh, right. And suddenly something that started off as a good idea and in principle works really, really well, suddenly become, yeah, no, this is just exploding into nonsense now, and we need to be able to kill the baby. So, and that was it. So this was kind of my corporate bit now. Redhill Games, we are currently hiring. For those that are interested, we have a booth downstairs. We also have beer somewhere, I believe, in the building. Some of the open positions we have at the moment are, you know, on there, I guess. I've been at the company now 3 years. I relocated from the Czech Republic. Probably one of the best things that I've ever done. I cannot, and it sounds a very corporate thing, but I can't stress enough how cool it is to be able to go somewhere and work with some of the most incredible people in the games industry. There has been a recent announcement. We have a video. Unfortunately, we can't tell you more information other than Redhill Games are now starting co-development with someone else. We have a video.
I cannot say.
The first time I played that particular game was with a group of friends.
It's very similar to other games. You have to open a program and then you will launch the game.
Started playing with some random people.
That's a game that pew pew and boom boom.
I lose badly.
And we won.
But eventually I had a lot of fun.
Now it's AAA. Now we're talking.
It's AAA, first-person shooter.
Sense of accomplishment.
Deliver our absolute best efforts.
We really put the bar high up.
This is one of the one-in-a-lifetime chance.
You will know more when you join us.
Don't wait. Apply like right now.
That's the corporate bit. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Any questions? Personally speaking, it was I've spent the last couple of years working on a PC game, so we've not had to sort of deal with that. In the past, when I've worked on console games, it wasn't something necessarily that we took into consideration with audio. That said, with the PlayStation, they have a little speaker on the actual controller which we could actually control and say, actually, we want the sound to come through here instead. With that, it was a case of knowing what's gimmicky and what is actually immersive. 9 times out of 10, it just feels very gimmicky. Very few instances actually come across as being sort of interesting or anything like that. Like one of my first games that I worked on actually was for the Nintendo DS. I worked on GTA Chinatown Wars, and they have a built-in microphone, which is kind of the opposite sort of thing. But you could go in and you could buy scratch cards, and on the DS you could like scratch off the scratch cards, and if they had a little dirt on it, you could blow on it and it would get away all of the dust. Yes, it is a bit gimmicky, but at the same time, it was also quite intuitive, because if if you've ever had a scratch card, what's the first thing you do? Oh yeah, it does the same thing. Yeah. Likewise, there was other things that we could use that for. Like the touch screen. We use that for hot wiring mini game, and again, if there's a microphone there, we can use that. If there's a speaker, generally we didn't really use the speaker much, but the haptic feedback and the vibrations and things like that. With the PS5, it's very, very different, because they actually have trigger sort of vibrations, and that, again, that goes into sort of like, should the frequency of a sound, or should a sound affect the vibration? And then it goes into actually, well, that becomes a technical problem then, because me as an audio designer, I don't actually have any access to the haptic feedback system. That's a coder that has to do that, and then it's a game designer that has to design, well, how much rumble is too much rumble? Does that distract the player from what they're doing, or does it enhance the gameplay? And most of that, they can look at the audio and go, well, how should it feel? If it feels good, which is a bit of a cop-out thing of saying for haptic feedback, I guess, but does it work with the sounds that are actually being played? Do they link? Are they related? We was working on some tech back at Pinewood Studios with a VR system, where we did the same thing. One of the VR systems that we had was the PSVR, which had like the vibrating sort of handheld thing. And we very much did that with the, there was a thunderstorm that was happening in the game. I worked on a game called The Invisible Hours, which is like an interactive experience more than a game. But like, there was bolts of lightning that used to happen, and as the storm got closer, they'd vibrate more intensively. And we hooked into the waveform of that so that we could actually tell the coder, this is how loud it's going to be, and we could scale it from that perspective. But very rarely would we actually design something for the haptic system with a sound in mind. Usually we would have like, this is how we want it to sound, go do your thing. So. No. Yeah. It is, but not for that reason. One of the things that we have to consider is the platform that people are playing the game on. Mobile games, for an example, unless you're wearing headphones, you've got to assume that certain frequencies the player isn't going to hear. Likewise, you want to make sure that if someone's playing like GTA 5, for an example, people forget this, but GTA 5 was originally released on Xbox 360 and PS3. Like, how terrifying is that? But at the same time, we had to remember that although the game does support 5.1 and things like that, most people are going to play it through their TV, which is possibly the worst kind of way to hear a sound in a video game. But at the same time, there's only like 0.1% of the population of gamers that have 5.1 surround sound that they're playing their games through. Very more so these days, I have to say, but like 10 years ago, almost nobody had 5.1. So like, why should we spend so much time on all these big sweeping soundscapes if 90% of that sound isn't going to be heard through really crappy speakers? So we do have to sort of consider that, and we do have to engineer it in a way that makes sense for the people that are listening. But certainly with PC games like with 9 to 5, we had to design a lot of the sounds on the assumption that people were going to wear headphones. We also had to design the sound with the assumption that not only would they be wearing headphones, but also they would have friendly chat and they would be talking over most of the game sounds. So similar sort of sounds, but different kind of problems. So, Martin. Mm-hmm.
When you say you get like an ammo pack or like some
Yeah.
item, whatever, the sound it does is obviously a UI sound to telegraph that you just picked up that. Right?
Yep.
But they do make those sound like it would kind of be the sound when you pick up like an ammo
Yeah.
pack or something, right? So it's super strange as well because they do make those sounds sound like.
Yeah, it's that's obviously by design, but the psychology behind that is if you pick up a bag, you expect it to sound like a bag when you pick it up. You don't expect it to sound like a hamster dying, you know, and that's as design. You know, you want to make sure that you're telegraphing, oh, is that bag heavy or is it light? How do you do that? Well, the sound it makes is a really good example. Even if the only person that hears that is you, the player, you want to know, like, another side of that coin as well is like, okay, does that player have heavy armor or light armor? Well, you can telegraph that in how it sounds, even if no one else is going to hear those same sounds. So the psychology behind that is we want to telegraph to the player, not just, oh, you've done a thing, but also you've, like, how do you know that it's ammunition versus coins? Yeah. Yeah, a bloop or a blob, yeah. So, yeah.
Tutorial, which is equally well made, I think, but they just went completely the other way around, where literally they tell you, look at art.
Yeah. But
there's this like little picture on the wall, and they go like, now, you know, you should be able to look around so that you have the same narrative.
Yeah.
Look around, but they literally tell you like, there's a picture here, look at art, stare at art.
Well, one of the interesting things about Portal 2 is they subconsciously they work out if the player likes to play with the inversion of their camera. Yeah. Some people have this thing where, like, when you look up, sort of thing, they press down for some unknown reason. And the way that they do this is they say, like, look up, and if you look up by pressing down on your thing, it automatically changes your settings. Yeah, it does. Without you having to go in settings. Okay, right, change the inversion. Yes, right. Rather than doing that and bringing the player out of the gameplay, they actually have that as part of the tutorialization and the onboarding. Again, absolutely brilliant. Why? Because there's full immersion. They don't expect the player to, like, they're like, okay, how do you jump? What button do you use for jump? Boink. Oh, A, there we go. That's how we do it. And that's a really good example of how they use diegetic sounds to actually tell the player, like, you're hearing this voice. It's not a voice in your head. It's a voice that's, you know, telling you to interact with something in the game mode. If it says, go to the art, look at, you know, stare at art, you know, you should now feel better about yourself and, you know, exhilarate. You're like, it's telling you to look at something in the game mode, which means it's diegetic. It's telling, like, this is, you go here, do this thing. they could have not done that. They could have just pop up, go here, do this. You know, UI on screen, things like that. You know, Dead Space does an excellent example with that, where the menu system is actually part of the game world, where he's like, and it's a big 3D thing that pops up. Brilliant. Again, it's still a menu, it's still UI, but because it's diegetic, it's in the game world, there's still all the immersion there. The downside of that is like, what does that sound? I can't even. Yeah. Which is, again, like pros and cons. How do you telegraph this information? What's the most effective way? That's how we do it. Any more? Just 1 second, yeah. We used Wise, and what we had to do is we actually had to make some sacrifices there. One of the things that we actually had was we actually had the sound of the mechanism of the gun, the click noise, the mechanics of the gun, then the bang, then you know the thump of it, and then the tail. We had those all as sort of separate elements, so that the further away you got from the person shooting, you wouldn't hear the mechanics of the gun, you just hear the bang, and the further away you got, you just hear the tail. The upside of that is there's a lot of level of detail. You can tell if they are closer to you, you can tell everything else, but the voice limit was quite high. To combat that, we basically baked everything down so that, like, actually this gunshot no longer has 13 different elements, it has one element, which is the whole gun, and the second element was the tail. That was the one thing that the compromise was. We need the tail because we need to telegraph to the player if they are on a roof or if they're not. Anything else is like, well, yes, it would be nice if we could do the orientation. It'd be nice if we could do the distance attenuation thing. But the reality is it costs too much. So we just like, let's bake that down. That is now the gun sound. That is how it's going to be. The upside is we went from using each gun having 97 voices to 5, which is a massive improvement on optimization. The downside is if I'm stood next to you, I can hear the gun mechanics and everything really, really nice. If I'm 35 meters away, I can hear the exact same thing, just a little bit quieter. But if you're on a 3v3v3 multiplayer shooter and you're in a gunfight, do you really care? No, you probably don't. So the solution there is we bake sounds down that we can't use the lots of voices for, and if we can't still use that or it interferes with the gameplay, we get rid of it completely. It's annoying and it's frustrating, but it is what it is. It depends. We do have access to sound libraries. Sound libraries are really good for things that you can't actually do in real life, like explosions and gunshots. Like, they're not safe to do. There are libraries for that, and I absolutely would use those all the time. However, sometimes, like my personal library that I have is now 2 terabytes in size, and you're looking at hundreds of thousands of sounds. And sometimes it's just like, it's just easier for me to get a microphone and go, do you know what? I know exactly what I want, and it'll take me 5 minutes to record it. Or 45 minutes scrolling through endless files to find that one sound I might want to use. So for me, at least, we always try to source the sound that we need ourselves, because we don't have to worry too much about licensing, because all libraries have to be licensed. Not really a problem generally, but the main thing is it is easier just to get the sound that you want rather than to try and sort of find it. But again, there are the exceptions for that are things like, you know, gunshots, explosions, things like that. You know, like sometimes, like when I was at Pinewood Studios, for an example, we would record, we would actually go on location and we would record explosions ourselves. One thing that we had to do is we had to record like impact sounds of things falling on the ground, you know, trees, things like that. So we had to bury microphones, and that becomes a very costly thing, you know, not just time-wise, but if you have 37 mics that you have to bury in the ground at different distances so that you can get a particular effect, you have to, you have to sort of, what do we need for that? Well, we need outboard gear so that we can actually record it. We need 37 different microphones. We then have, like, what we used to do is we used to put condoms over the microphones so that, because they're thin, they, you know, but it also keeps the microphones like dirt free, but you're looking at 37 of them, so you have to go and buy 37 condoms. If you're recording over like 4 weeks, that's a lot of condoms that you got to use. And like when this particular instance, we were recording wet Foley work as well, so wet leather. You can't just put water on leather and record it because it dries up really quick. So we ended up using lube because that stays wet and doesn't drip everywhere and everything's fine. Do you know how much lube you need for a full horse saddle? A lot. Muggins here was the person that had to go and source everything for the session. So I'm like, right, I need 500 condoms and about 80 litres of lube. Oh, it's for work, yeah. So it's not all fun and games here. Sometimes there are moments where you're like, this was fun when I wasn't having to buy all this from a local shop, you know. So yeah, most of the time we try and do things ourselves unless it is explosions or super embarrassing. So anything else? I think that is about time anyway, so thank you very much.